both the students and the instructors and the TAs have come together to create this community where reading and literature, especially the writing of it, is a bridge through which we get to know each other. And for the past 1 week, the instructors have done a wonderful work of teaching the participants, and now would have to hear them read. And I'd also want to thank Mike for helping us run this. I'm really excited. So the order of the reading, we'll begin the reading by having Mary Hickman read for us. And a little introduction. Mary Hickman is joining us from Nebraska, Lincoln to be precise. She has been a BTL instructor for more than 5 years now, and I know we're very blessed to have her back. She has published her poems in a lot of numerous journals, and I know I also know the students are looking forward to hear you read, as I am too. So welcome.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm excited to be here with you. I miss all your faces, I will say that. The names are wonderful to have too. Often when we do the virtual BTL reading, we don't even get the names. So it's exciting to see all of you in the audience via your names. But yeah, at some point, maybe I'll even ask for faces. It's wonderful to be together today. I wanted to read a few poems, and I'm trying to just set my computer up slightly. There we go. A few poems that I wrote on the beach. I felt like it's summer here. I know it's winter for some of you. I hear it's very cold in Zimbabwe right now. But it's summer here and I was feeling some beach vibes. So I thought, we've talked in a couple of my classes about influences, things from your childhood that have kept coming back, poems you've particularly loved in your life that you find yourself returning to. And so I thought I would read to you some poems that I wrote a couple of years ago when I was in a place here in the US called Miami Beach. It's an extremely colorful place full of tons of people and things going on and beautiful beaches, and there's always something going on. When I was there for a writing residency, and it seems a bit like the most unlikely place for a writing residency, but it was actually a completely wonderful place to go and write since it was so full of so many things going on. And I'd come from the dead of winter in Nebraska, where it was ice covered. Leaving the ground in the airplane, there was nothing to be seen but just a sort of frozen tundra. And then landing in the kind of tropical beaches of Florida was really amazing. In the residency where I was, a lot of writers stay there and then they leave books behind. And it was also the personal library there of a writer who the residency had been named after. It's in a hotel called the Betsy Hotel. And they have a whole room that's just for writers to come and write in. And so there were all these books on the shelf. One of the books I found on the shelf was a really early edition of Ariel by Sylvia Plath. And I took it to the beach with me and I was reading it on the beach. And Ariel is the name of a horse that Plath was really attached to. Those of you that are fans of Shakespeare also know Ariel as a spirit in The Tempest. And then Ariel, most people's first thought that comes to mind with the name Ariel is the Little Mermaid, and especially the Disney Little Mermaid with the red hair, the cartoon. And when I was a child, I was really quite attached to that cartoon and that mermaid. And I always felt like everything in that movie was extremely unfair, but also in some ways a portrait of the life of the artist or the poet. They put it in terms of romantic love, but I think you can think of it in terms of sacrifice and craft and things like that. So thinking about Plath and her beautiful red hair, perhaps that was part of it, but also thinking about the Little Mermaid, I ended up writing this strange series of poems on the beach, and I thought I would share those with you today. I have not sent these out to publish anywhere. I'm still working on them, so you're the first airing of these. Ariel. What is the fat witch called? spilling out, spilling. Oh, sorry, my computer just, I'm going to start over. My computer just gave me a message I did not want. All right, Ariel. Ariel, what is the fat witch called? Spilling out, spilling out. Ursula, what is the name of the little crab? He's singing, he's dancing. Is he wise? Sebastian. What pearl rolls coral over smoke, pours music down the volcano, spins steel drum rust into a sea growing rings on loops, threads like red purple spires hung with shark-jawed shelves, until it all thuds with bass. It's okay. I remembered his name. I sit on the seafloor and cry. It's all salt water. Crying and not crying, the same wet purple, Ursula blacking world spilling her ink. What is a performance and what is love? What is the moment Ariel thinks she is love and knows she's been had? Steel drum ringing in lost steel drum, wrapping sound waves in waves of wet, her throat a burnt coal, her marshmallow throat toasted on a spit. It is not gonna be okay. Ariel, you are. Ariel, you are seasick, lovesick, Picasso's dry toast. They watch you, lead you, the enemies of art, a syntax of pop rock sparking in your throat, attempt to speak. A zipper dream of post-erotic Tokyo dawn palace silk strings slipped in this book, no death, but a split fin thrown up like birdshot in beach grass. Past death now, find a couch in sun, the beach dragged, black fan splayed. Ariel, self-consciousness is the enemy of art. Ariel, Ariel, Sylvia, snow for the beach, island of rain, island of bees, box of the father, wound of the friend. She was a handful, says Merwin, who dutifully and fully loved Ted. Hi, brain, you soaped, you souped. Ah, you are A-okay today, so drown it and plan it and rise. But what is dead? But what is dead? The young men, the old, the far of us, I am, colonized and yapping. In that photo, you are husband/wife, sit mano a mano, Smith Corona facing off with Royal. The wood table between you stretches long as freighters, sand runways, a super slim skyscraper, or Mary Ruffles, possibly impossibly thin Virginia Slims. Says me, says you, and now I foam to wheat, a glitter of seas. Oh, but marriage is what brings us from father's house to the edge of our seats. Ariel, I lost a book upon the shore where we all wore lime bikinis in Lamborghinis and Miami spring break. Ariel wrapped in sunsets, wet breath, salt wind, and speakers. I caught a whiff of algae and fell forward, blushed, or just swooned a bit, and tried hard to push the world's bugs to a thought's far corner. Inferior pages floated in at tide, scraped free of ink, wrecked in seaweed, their paper soft as buttered pasta laid in sheets across the plate. I woke that night and smeared a roach across my face. Thus, God granted me the grace to sing from a stone's throat. This song like milk to soak the beach. This song like blood to rise the sun. And I am being really conscious of time, so I'm going to stop there, but that's a little taste of some of the things I've been working on lately. Thank you so much for listening. And it's really wonderful to be here with all of you. This is always my most favorite thing I ever do, is to get to spend my time with all of the brilliant, beautiful spirits here today.
Thank you so much, Mary. And I know we're blessed to have you. It's been a wonderful 1 week. The next on our list is Vladimir Poleganov. Vladimir comes from us from way of Bulgaria, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about BTL. It's that we don't just bring students from different parts of the world together, but we also bring writers, just something that IWP is known for. Vladimir is a Bulgarian writer, translator, and screenwriter. He's the author of one collection of short stories, The Deconstruction of Thomas S., and one novel, The Other Dream. He's currently working on a PhD in Bulgarian literature at Sofia University, where he also teaches courses on creative writing and fantastic literature. Welcome, Vladimir.
Thank you. Thank you, Romeo, and thank you for being here, for having me here. It's, as Mary said, a beautiful experience. It's one of the best experiences in my life also, and it's this great place that I've been coming back to every summer since 2020, filled with hope and happiness. And you all know that these past 3 years have been strange and terrible. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and I also love synchronicities and stuff like that. So I just want to briefly share what's been sitting on my desk for the past couple of weeks. It's this book of poems. I was so happy to hear Mary mentioning it before her beautiful reading. I'll be reading from my novel, The Other Dream. It's an old one. I'm finishing a new one. I'm supposed to hand it in tomorrow. I was supposed to hand it in to the publisher a week ago, but I couldn't meet that deadline. Not meeting deadlines is one of the things I think most writers do. Hopefully most writers do, or otherwise I'm a terrible writer. So I'll be reading from my old novel. It's a strange novel about a guy that's he's either dead or going mad. But in the process of dying or going mad, he discovers a new place, this other world. He thinks it's a planet. Maybe it's a planet. Maybe it's afterlife. I don't know. No one actually knows. And the portion I'll be reading is from a place very close to the end of the novel, and he's talking to his wife. He doesn't know that he's either dead or going crazy, or has gone crazy, but she knows, and she's telling him about their second date. What he doesn't know is that he remembers that date, but he doesn't know that during that date she wasn't there. So that's all I think you need to know. And I'll put my reading glasses on. Okay. Do you remember our next date? Our next date? I cast a puzzled glance at the night in front of me, but saw nothing. Sometimes if you stare at the dark long enough, you start seeing things. And I don't mean the way your eyes adjust to make out the contours of a given space, but those rare moments when you're all alone in the deepest, most opaque kind of darkness. The kind that only lasts for a few seconds when you startle yourself awake in the middle of the night. You open your eyes and, for a long moment, nothing changes. If this all light-absorbing, velvety dark goes on for long enough, your consciousness starts to populate it with images and figures, anything to make it more bearable, because even the most horrific scenes are better than the dark of an absence. I was hoping to trick my mind and have it show me, on the other side of the window, not some fiction, but the memory my wife was asking about. Alas, that did not happen. Instead, I closed my eyes and let myself be immersed in her story. We hadn't seen each other in some time, maybe 6 years. I had just started working here, but here was back in the day at the other end of the city, you may recall. Our offices took up a chain of underground halls, only accessible by an old elevator. We thought it was a relic from the Second World War, or otherwise antique, but it turned out to be brand new, a counterfeit. Victor and I would write to each other often then. Victor is a friend character, to that guy. And he'd even stop by occasionally. He called our offices the underworld. But my colleagues liked him and got so used to him being there that we started taking him with us on assignments. Sometimes we would go to great lengths explaining our work to him, and sometimes we wouldn't bother at all, observing and recording his every reaction. Shameful, I know, but we were young, as feeble an excuse as that may seem to me now. That one time I called on him for a bigger project, reintroducing books back into the libraries they once belonged to. So it was a fairly delicate job, mostly because many of the libraries had been transformed, filled with new inhabitants, or simply left to rot and ruin. We were also operating at the margins of the local authorities' consent, which introduced an added layer of complexity to the proceedings. Sounds like something to be done discreetly, without unnecessary guests and gawkers, doesn't it? But we wanted to try something different, and that's where Victor came in. The underworld invites you on a thrilling adventure. Are you game? Is what I texted him, convinced he'd reply straight away, and he did. We can't wait, we have nothing else to do. I didn't think to ask him why he was referring to himself in the plural. He had done it before, for one. Plus, if he wasn't alone, that would make the experiment even more interesting. A few hours later, when I came out of the underworld, he was waiting for me, with you. I won't ask if you remember. I know you know. Victor was supposed to go traveling, as I'm sure you yourself had made important plans that never came to fruition after our meeting set you on a different path. Worlds divide constantly. The universe is best observed through a microscope, not a telescope. Yet we always choose the latter when staring up into the sky. We think the larger the space, the more of a hope it could hold within itself. But I digress. On the way to the library, I mostly spoke to Victor. You and I never moved beyond small talk. Nothing more than, hi, how are you, what's up? At least not while the van drove us through the city's streets, silent under the night's bell jar, free of crowds but awash in artificial light, in sounds and chimes more musical than noisy. Intelligent, all of them watching us intently, recording everything, gorging themselves on our image. The library we had chosen for the experiment, on the other hand, could not see us. It was an abandoned old building, one of the very few left in the city. You know the type. Broken windows, walls graffitied so long ago, the paint was not even kinetic. We waited to bring her back to life, unbeknownst to anyone. We wanted it to only be discovered by accident, unsuspecting visitors in awe of its collection of tomes from across human history. We were, of course, aware that it would take some time. The first subscribers would be animals, dogs, rats, pigeons, and other urban fowl. Owls, if we're lucky. The other part of the experiment had nothing to do with books, however, whatsoever. Two of my colleagues had spent the entire day preparing the building. I went in to see them. While the two of you waited outside, a short time later, I stuck my head out of a window and beckoned you to come in. I know which corridors you walk through on your way, which rooms you stopped to take in, where Victor kicked a wall, where you paused to listen to for the natural noises of the building. We were watching for you the whole time. I decided to wait for you to pass through the miniature labyrinth of discarded bookshelves in the hall before I revealed myself. I believe both you and Victor were having fun, like you were on some kind of adventure. You behaved like teenage boys on their summer holiday. The world was full of secrets and only you could read the signs, solve its mysteries before school restarts. This was the first time I really saw you, the way I see you today. Impatient, curious, observant. It was your keen sense for detail that ruined the experiment, but it was worth it. The building was off the grid. There was no electricity, and the night was closing in, abetted by thick clouds that swarmed the moon like ants would a discarded corn kernel. We had generators, of course, but you didn't know that. You didn't know that there would be electricity in one hole, but not the other. You didn't know that while you were transfixed by the lights of the books, you were treading on the corpses of the old ones. You didn't think to question why you would be greeted by one of us in one reading room, but in another there would be nothing but the silence of old wood and eternal plastic. It all seemed natural to you, because this is the logic of the summer your hearts and minds had harked back to. The strange is essential. It came naturally to split up to at some point. Victor went left, you went right. There were doors for both of you to open, albeit you didn't have a handle, just a hole where the lock had been torn years, decades ago. You wasted no time sticking your hand inside, laughing when it wasn't pulled, ripped off, or bitten from the other side. Monsters in libraries never hide behind doors in the corners of dark rooms. They sit quietly on the shelves. By turning right, you chose the path that led you to me. I don't remember how much I believed in fate at that time, but I know that my faith started growing stronger the minute you agreed to explore the holes by yourself. Besides, I had always felt the energy of places, the natural one that makes them appear in the first place, and the one that people inevitably leave behind, like a scent or a scruff mark. Because we are everywhere, us humans, we have become a synonym for materiality. We had always wanted it. At the very moment one of us called everything that surrounds us Mother Nature, we had made it. But here I am going on tangents again. We are, sadly, no longer in that library. And you're not waiting for me at the end of some corridor. You are here, now, and I can't let you go. The sound of a book falling, that's what I used to attract your attention back there, in the hole you found yourself in after leaving Victor. I had picked a small hardback with a faded cover and empty pages. Maybe it had been a notebook, a journal, or something, because ink doesn't just disappear like that. Across the paper, there were marks, like those left by a pen that had run out. The cellulose sinks temporarily under the pressure of the nib, as if yielding, but as soon as the writer is gone, it bounces back and expels her words. But the grooves in those pages were different. They were carved to last, like Braille in reverse. I wondered what they were. A choose your own story, kind of book for writers, perhaps. Something briefly popular in the distant past, like adult coloring books. I could just hear the advertising slogan in my head. Write your own novel. Choose one of our countless narratives, or write one of your favorite literary masterpieces anew, all by yourself. Sci-fi, Shakespeare, a crime novel, Marcel Proust. Choose what you want to write. A free pen included with every order. The last bit made me laugh out loud, so loud, in fact, that I dropped the book. It made a pleasant thud. So I decided that this was how I was going to get you to focus if you spend too long idling around. I picked it back up just as you were coming in. Thud. You stopped at the threshold. I saw it on the recording afterwards. Stopped and listened for a second thought. Maybe because in mystery stories, sounds always repeat themselves. Their origins may be obscure, but they always come in pairs. But there was no follow-up, so you entered. The room was bare. You could see that straight away because the automatic lights we had installed switched on immediately, revealing the empty space. Books and their shelves might return someday, their readers with them, but for now, all there was a forcibly lit hole and me standing in the middle of it. You don't remember what we talked about, but in some way you knew. I will not repeat it now. I believe that you unearthed it from your memory one day, here or elsewhere. But it was romantic, of course. How could it not be? It was our true beginning, even though it felt a little like an end. In that forgotten hall, we were in a ghost city, the borrowed lights giving everything a post-apocalyptic yellow tinge. We spent about an hour together, saw a real-life rat, heard something we couldn't explain, and touched each other not at all. But then, years later, you would return to that night, again and again, to that first moment and smile. We both did. And that's it. Thank you, and sorry for my reading. I'm always very anxious before, during, and after reading. But thank you all so much, and happy to be here.
That was such a lovely reading, Vladimir. Yeah, I share the anxiousness with you too. The external list is Tariro Ndoro. Tariro Ndoro is the author of the poetry collection Aringada Like a Gringa, Like a Foreigner, which won the inaugural Nama Award for Outstanding Poetry Book from Zimbabwe's National Arts Council. She's a finalist in several other poetry competitions and has had her work anthologized and translated. She has a BSc in microbiology and an MA in creative writing. She lives in Harare. Welcome, Tariro.
Hey, good evening, everyone, or good morning, whatever time zone you're in. It's such a great pleasure to be reading at BTL today and also taking part for the first time. I'll be reading 4 poems today, so 2 very old ones and 2 new ones, and I'll start with the old ones. Sorry, now Vladimir mentioning nervousness has made me nervous too. The first one is called Fragments, and it's really inspired by my time at my maternal grandmother's house. And the second poem is a companion piece to it, and it's about my grandfather. Fragments, Weekend Mythos. Pick a color, blue. The color of ocean, of water, of vast expanses, and perhaps escape. Sapir Dam rushes like a blur before the girl's eyes to the place where time stops still, home. Pick a color, white, of white sails, white yachts, and pillowy sails of the people who swim there, and the glistening of fishing rod twine, where the girl wants to swim, but she's told the river holds secrets. The dam is a crucible of many fish. And time stands still, screams backwards, until Max, the taxi driver, brings her back to her grandmother's greeting. Wauya mwanangu, flesh of my flesh, and everything is like it was before. In the shadow of Tsanzaguru and the lion-head Tikwiri, pick a smell, wet stones, of women hitching skirts to wade in the river, of perfection soap, greased onto dirty shirts by women speaking free, a dialect so rare it will be ridiculed out of the girl's mouth in later years. Pick a smell then, acrid, wet, cattle rushing to kick their feet in the dip, brown, black, mottled hides, and curved horns, an excursion soon to be outgrown, along with the climbing of copies. Pick a smell then, acrid, dry, of the library her grandfather left behind, shelves that still carry Hemingway and Enicheta, but weevils have eaten the pages. The plots have holes in them now. Bags of fertilizer keep the pages company. Pick a sound, a clang, metal on metal, iron sharpens iron, cowbells on beasts returning home as the orange sun sets. Pick a sound, laughter, 2 sisters playing skip rope in the dust till their feet are brown and ashy. On their tongues, a borrowed song that never made sense. Christopher Columbus was a great man. He went to America in a saucepan. Into supper by firelight, orange flames and cricket song. Wood smoke has burnished the walls. Remember the girl of those nights, where the milky galaxy of bright stars shone, sometimes blue, sometimes bright, and sometimes shooting across the sky. Make a wish, then to gossip and prayers and an hour of Radio 1. Pick a sight, big silver moon in the inky black night, hanging like low fruit, ripe for the picking. How does the legend go? The old Roji kings tried to steal it from the heavens, a legend as ancient as the rocks. In the shadow of Tsanzaguru and Mount Tikwiri. Pick a smell, wet earth, wet grass, early morning dew, cow dung and clean smoke. Pick a color, pink, frock, Sunday best, follows her grandmother in Anglican blue, in Anglican white, in swift gait, in a surprise baptism, glacial water on the girl's forehead. Your name is now Teresa Maria Patricia. The girl forgets her new moniker. A particle, dust, gathers on the baptismal certificate, now folded carefully, now placed in the cardboard box, labeled envelopes of Tudor, wherein lies the last image of a long-dead grandfather, last seen alive in the summer of 76. Cause of death, unknown. Okay, the next poem is a companion piece to that, and a sort of ode to my grandfather, who disappeared during a war and was found later. In 76, what we know of him: he was tall, I have his eyes, he was headmaster, he drove a car, the war was hot in 76. These are facts. Concerning his death, he died in 76, the war was hot. He drove off one day, didn't come home. They found his body post rigor mortis. Boys and men were disappearing those days. The war was hot in 76. This is hearsay. Concerning my mother, she lost her father in 76. She was 11 years old. She had 2 younger siblings, and she learned to work hard, learned to work with the reins. She sold sugar cane by the roadside to pay for school supplies. This is her testimony. The war was hot in 76. In 76, Manicaland was hot. Once there was a meeting called for in the bush, and it turned out to be an ambush. Selous scouts poured sulfur on the backs of people, and Grandma crawled home on her knees. She entered the house through a window, waited for death underneath her bed. The war was hot in 76. This we hardly speak of. Okay, so the previous 2 poems were in my collection, and the next 2 poems are very new. I wrote them a few months ago, and they have never been published before. The first one is called Burial. Burial 1. Shirikadzi yadonera mukuva. Translation: the widow falls into the grave. Translation: a widow jumps heart first onto her lover's casket, propelled by grief and longing. 2. Vanavemshaka vanogerwa msoro. Translation: someone shaves the heads of the deceased children. Translation: a stone-faced relative applies the sharp blade to the heads of all the deceased issue. Grief is signified by bald heads and wet faces, their hair burned immediately to avert witchcraft. 3. Chimborume inofa isina vanhu inovigwa negonzo pamusana. Translation: an unmarried man must be buried with a rat. Translation: the unmarried man with no children should be buried with a rat on his back. So the wailing spirits of his unborn issue do not beleaguer him in the land of the dead. But no cattle were exchanged between your father and mine. I fall into your grave, a stranger and not a widow. There are no tear-marked orphans with freshly shorn heads. In every lifetime, I fall upon your casket to take the place of the rat, to keep you company in the afterlife. In every lifetime, a man from the crowd pulls me away, pulls me back to the land of the living, where I must find my own joy, and leaves you to the afterlife, where you roam alone. And the last poem is Untitled, and is a companion piece to the previous one. But Mary the mother and Mary the friend shocked when they came face to face with the risen Christ. Beating heart, solid bone, he was not dead, not anymore. A lonely voice has reached to me from Nibelheim since the day they laid you down. Your message never changing. I am not really gone. Who is it that you mourn? And each morning here comes death, white-fanged with fury, taking you again and again, like an amputated life, constantly truncated. Okay. And that is what I'm sharing for today. Thank you so much for your attention.
Those were very powerful poems, and thank you for sharing those poems with us. The next faculty that I'll be reading is Rochelle Potkar. Rochelle Potkar is the author of 4 Degrees of Separation and Paper Asylum, shortlisted for the Rabindranath Tagore Literary Prize in 2020. Bombay Hangovers is a collection of short stories. Her poetry film, Skirt, featured on Shondaram Shondaland, and a few of her poetry readings have featured on Disney Plus Hotstar Shorts English. She's an alumni of Iowa's International Writing Program and a Charles Wallace Writers Fellow, University of Stirling. Her first screenplay was an NFDC India Screenwriters Lab 2018 selection and a quarter-finalist at the Atlanta Film Festival Screenwriting Competition in 2020. Her upcoming books include a first novel and a third book of poetry. She lives in the bustling city of Mumbai. Welcome, Rochelle.
Thank you, Romeo. And I'm so glad to be here again at BTL in 2023. Whenever I teach, I end up learning the most. It's cherishing to be amidst all of you. And like you, I'm eternally inspired by Chris Merrill and his world literature building initiatives. I hope to grow up someday and do a fraction of this at least. Now, whenever I have to follow immersive readings, I have to wake myself up. So following Mary, Vladimir, and Tariro, I'm lost. I realize, oh, I have to read too. So that's what happens. I will share 5 poems with you. And the first one needs no preamble, maybe a bit of performance. It's called Surrender. If I were a country, you would be my journalist. And because you are not an empty-headed bloke out for a quick fix, but investigative, idealist, committed, I would have shot you down the street and left you to bleed. If I were a country, and you my journalist, it would be a civil war, one too many, revolutions, changes in governments. I would have jailed you and kept you on CCTV. If I were a country, and you my journalist, I would have played a wait and watch game to see who wears the other, sleep deprived, akin to a Russian sleep experiment. But the more you stare, the more beautiful someone becomes. Remember? Many pass the cellars of my mind, few the cellars of my heart. I would blink first. I would give in from dictatorship to democracy. If I were a country and you my journalist, I would let you run a free press and media to change the face of an entire nation. Now, this second poem is called Gathering. I hail from a very large Goan Catholic family who has lived outside of Goa in Bombay, but we can never forget the nutty village that raised us. So this one is for them. I have changed all the names through the poem. I've shifted one name by the other. And my family anyway doesn't read any poetry, so they are unaware of this poem for the last 10 years. And so much for reading books. That's why read. You never know who's reporting on you. So this one is Gathering. My uncle had a strange habit of gathering people. Not less than 25 he would take on an outing. Like Auntie Perpetual, with her breast cut, who would lift her t-shirt every time to show us her story. Avo, who would stand and take a piss like a giraffe. Cousin Milton, who would talk about everyone's pants and panties. Uncle Ketan, who divorced his wife just before he turned blind and regretted it in hindsight. Or Aunt Bertha, who loved her husband so much they still bathed under picnic showers and sagging flesh of 40 years. A couple that bathes together. Aunt Nisa, who starved to look thin and ended up haggard because 1 kg less is not a year younger, and Aunt Alice, who was divorced when it was still a stigma. Uncle Wilfred had one phrase for every occasion in lyrical konkani, aimed to marginalize his opponents, who had marginalized him because of his poverty. My father would step further and further away from the kids cycling, as he would from the circle of life and everyone's life cycles. A few spare uncles would always sit on plastic chairs with the chauffeurs and the gardeners inaugurating alcohol bottles. Aunt Cassandra would be on a fertility pill, counting milestones of others' children and practicing her lotus-like parenting wisdom. Matilda Aunt orbited with curries and sourdough and cutlets fried in rava and cheap sunflower oil. People relished her friendship offerings, but never invited her for their parties. And the servants, equal of equal on the dinner plates with their heads full of lice, they wore shorts and their bras outside their t-shirts, they smoked beedies, hovered around the male cousins with bronze cricket thighs, and giggled at cousin Milton until they were molested and shunted home. My auntie, uncle's wife, would be interested in every soup and its recipe. Never mind which house or hotel we were in. Nothing escaped her gaze, even in daily navenas, angelus or rosaries. The peas in the pulao bond between Mata and Rosie. The filigreed work on Avo's gold bangles. The salary Jimmy uncle earned. The marks Edith brought home. My uncle would cut long journeys short with church mouse jokes on trains to Goa with break journeys at Miraj. He would click pictures of Doodh Sagar with as much panache as uncles Fred and Tony beat up their wives, and Auntie Emma stitched her husband's pocket from the opening outside so he wouldn't lend any more money. Every time Edith topped her class, there would be mayhem for all of us, the other children. When she got a job with a heavy pay packet, my aunt searched for zeros in every person, like ingredients in a soup. We had neither the high marks nor the money. We were the pariahs, patrons of penury. The day never belonged to us. As our aunt whipped us with her blue-eyed gaze in this room full of people. This is for the Fernandez Santos. Okay. The third poem is called Rage. And just like a lot of writers and poets and screenwriters, sometimes the pieces stay resonant with us even after all these years and years. And they become our own personal classic because of that, because it defeats time. And maybe it also has to do with the fact that sometimes the world doesn't change at all, even after all these years. So this poem, Rage, of a different tone. I have rage inside me that I thought was because of my parents, who fought like dogs. Dogs are always irrational or divine. They drew out a room and crayoned a window outside which I stood. I could do nothing, and it boiled in me, waiting to explode at the right heat and destiny. I was angry, but anger is irrationality and helplessness the first step towards self-pity. So the lava in me disguised, like Meh Sabah's pristine water, into the woman of acceptable traditions and marriageable ages. Others fought. Israel and Palestine, North and South Korea, Northwest Pakistan, Myanmar, Somalia, Nigeria, Mexico, Egypt. The USA shot Afghanistan and Iraq at crucifixion joints. Sri Lanka burned from the middle like paper. Tibet too, Syria was raped. Russia abducted Crimea. Every parent fought, and anger arose in every offspring. The well-kept waters broke their mirage and submerged villages of repose. And here I thought, if you ran away from your parents, it would be a peaceful place elsewhere. Okay. I hope I'm doing well with time. I'm going to alternate between moods because the world seesaws between that ebb and flow. In all our wars, we don't ask the children, the public in general, even the soldiers, if they want to be at war. And certainly we never asked the animals. I happen to catalogue the animals who were recruited in wars in this poem, called War Specials. As we went to war over animals on our plates, pigeons too were seized by their wing flaps, rings around claws, a phone number and address in Shakargarh and Naroval in Urdu. Spy pigeons, unbelieving of borders, photographed, carried messages, guided bombs, like knights wore horses that bit and kicked, and elephants that were machines. As we went to war over animals on our plates, animals were politicized too. Pigs squealed, camels patrolled, mules carried supplies, oxen artillery. Moose were trained not to be gun-shy for deep snow cavalry. And the dogs threw their weight or sniffed out mines. Monkeys dipped in oil and fire were thrown into enemy territory. When the seagulls flew, they carried torpedoes, dead rats explosives in their bellies. Vultures, pelicans, thrown to air, came back darkly and powderly. The new recruits were sharks with brain implants, cats controlling vermin, chickens detecting poison, bones and beaks in war memorials. It wasn't only Noah's dove that returned after the flood, Molotov cocktails. We haven't otherwise even left the bacteria, virus, fungi. Embedded with heavy explosives, unseen beasts, second only to racial slurs, we now have words to reproduce in our bodies and years, time, over our grand internet, staying in memory, trolled by embittered species. And words, they have a separate gallantry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. That was such a very powerful reading, especially the last one about animals and war, which says a lot about our world today and how we move through it without thinking about a lot of things. So thank you for being here and thank you for that powerful reading. The last person on our list today is Rumena Bužarovska, and I hope I didn't just murder that last name because I've been practicing it. She's joining us from North Macedonia, and she's a fiction writer, a literary translator, and social commentator. She's the author of 4 volumes of short stories translated into 14 languages. Her book, My Husband, has received critical acclaim in Europe and has been adapted into 5 stage productions in several European countries. Her literary translations into Macedonia include works by Flannery O'Connor, Truman Capote, Lewis Carroll, and John Coates. A 2018 resident of the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa, she's a professor of American literature and translation at the State University of Skopje. So, time out to fight and allow you to read. Welcome, Rumena, and I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Romeo. And you did very well with my last name and everything else. Thanks. It's very hard to go after Rochelle. There's a wonderful poet, Alice Fryman, from Georgia, and she says that she likes to be devastated, and that's what the poetry of Rochelle just did. Wonderful. And thank you for, I mean, I feel great that I'm in such a lineup. I really enjoy your writing, and I'm glad that I'm in such an amazing crowd. All right, so what I'm going to do is read from my last short story collection called I'm Not Going Anywhere, which was translated which I translated into English with Steve Bradbury, who actually translates into from Chinese into English, and he translates poetry. But I met him in Iowa, and from then on we started working together. It's a very interesting situation that we began to translate together, even though he doesn't speak any Macedonian. But so I basically translate them. He kind of edits the translations, and it's a very good friendship, actually. So yeah, this was published by Delkia Archive Press just actually this year, and that's me actually on the cover. And my dad took a picture of me when I was 8, skipping rope in front of my building and this was our car, which was like a tiny little Fiat. Now, this book, it's called I'm Not Going Anywhere. It's short stories that are quite long, actually, but it deals with the complex of inferiority that people who are not Westerners technically feel from the West, and how sometimes Westerners feel superior. And this kind of complex that young Macedonians have, and it happens very frequently around South Europe as well, this idea that they need to immigrate, that life is elsewhere, to quote Milan Kundera, who just died a couple of days ago. So I was really fascinated by that idea that, everything else except the West is a dump. And I was criticizing that in this particular book. I'm going to read the beginning of the story Medusa, which is it's more lighthearted, and so that's why I chose it, but it's only the beginning, just so that you get a taste of my writing. Sofia has a few things going for her. She's a great host, for example, and she's also an amazing geologist, but everyone knows that. And that's about it. She and her husband Ivan live in Meadowview, the suburb with all the rich people. Ivan used to be in academia, but never really tried to outshine his wife's success. He has the PhD in archaeology. We're both into the earth, Sofia had chirped when we first met. He's a Capricorn and I'm a Virgo. Ha ha. I wasn't sure what she was trying to tell me. Earth signs, she explained. Ivan is one of the co-owners of a company for dental implants run by his family, hence Meadowview. Sofia and Ivan have 2 children, as do we, except ours are younger and are girls. That evening, our daughters were watching as Simon, that's my husband, and I were getting ready for Ivan and Sofia's Boogie Nights theme party in Meadowview. I'd gone so far as to order a pair of vintage roller skates, but I didn't dare wear them in front of the girls. They were already screaming anyhow, refusing to give us back our wigs. Mine was a blonde bushy afro, and Simon's an Austin Powers knockoff. In his white bodysuit unbuttoned to the navel, he was supposed to look like a pimp, but he wasn't terribly convincing. Looking at ourselves in the mirror, we both felt a bit disappointed, but refused to admit it. We look groovy, we lied to each other. We're so rad, we egged each other on. You're my Professor Pimp, I teased him, though in truth, the way his spidery black chest hair stood out against his pale skin struck me as somehow distasteful. Another problem was that my own costume, a short floral dress with bell sleeves, had turned out much too revealing. I consoled myself that my legs would look longer and not as lumpy once I put on the roller skates. Knowing we'd be drinking, we called a cab. Our daughter's screaming finally faded out of earshot as we shut the doors of the taxi. 154 Meadowview, please, I told the cabbie, conscious of the cachet of that address. Just saying it made me feel more important and dignified than usual, though I would have been ashamed to admit it in public. I understood why Sofia and Ivan lived there, to appear to be well-heeled and famous. They didn't have the millions they'd have needed to afford a house in the heart of this neighborhood, so they'd settled on the very edge, over a gully and with an expansive view of the busy road with its constant drone and exhaust fumes directly below. Their home was undoubtedly a mansion all the same. Maybe that's why their 2 sons never made an appearance at their parents' parties. Probably they were locked up in one of the many chambers of the family palace, perhaps in one of the several living rooms or down in the basement that had been converted into a cinema. Or maybe they just never made an appearance because they were teenagers. But there were times when one of them would creep soundlessly into the kitchen like a ghost and snatch something out of the fridge. "Is that Mark?" Sophia would call out. The boys have English names, by the way. "No, I think it's George." "George, Georgie, Georgie," she'd bawl if she was already tipsy. But neither Mark nor Georgie ever even said hello. Ivan's origins are from Rijeka, though he might be Serbian. Most probably, he's mixed, just like everyone else. He says he's Yugoslav and insists on speaking, quote unquote, our language with us, even though Simon and I don't consider this language to be really ours. Sophia's origins, meanwhile, are more mysterious. She says she was born in Belgrade, but she's definitely not from there. I know this because she can't speak our language and keeps switching to English, though she probably catches on when we're talking with Ivan. And I can tell she can understand what we're saying when Simon and I are having a conversation. Her favorite dish is a fried, oily, onion-laden minced meat dish we call kofta, and she calls a meatball. She sometimes boasts of having an exotic past and of having resided in several Balkan cities. She might be a refugee. Who knows? One of her common complaints was, "I'm sick and tired of being asked where I'm from," adding, "It's downright racist." "We're all from somewhere," I heard her say once. Everyone around her nodded with compassion. "What's it to you where my accent's from anyhow?" "But sometimes it's just a way for people to get to know each other," I replied. "They learn things about each other's history, culture, stuff like that. Hardly a bad way to start a conversation, don't you think?" This was something I confronted her about back then, though after several years living in England, I must confess I've started leaning toward her opinion. She looked straight through me, though, not even bothering to respond. The truth is, she'd only started giving me the time of day after it dawned on her I was Simon's wife. Also, ever since she found out I was a published author, "Literary theory sounds fancy," she tittered. She hasn't turned her back on me quite so much. We were going to be late for the party. I figured I was stalling because I secretly didn't want to go, and I was hoping maybe Simon didn't either. But even after so many years spent living in England, it was on rare occasions that we were invited to socialize. The last two theme parties Sophia and Ivan had hosted after moving to their castle had turned into fiascos. The first one was a famous couples party, where we couldn't decide whether to go with Sunny and Cher or Bjorn and Agnetha, but finally went as the latter. The other two couples invited, I thought there'd be more of us, also showed up as Bjorn and Agnetha. So there we were in the living room, listening to ABBA, chit-chatting in our ridiculous outfits, nibbling on tortilla chips and a selection of store-bought dips. Sophia had prepared her signature delicacy, the meatball. We toasted with the sangrias and margaritas that Ivan, a self-declared cocktail master, would always make and then wait dog-like for a compliment every time we took a sip. After getting himself thoroughly plastered, Ivan announced it was time for karaoke. None of us were keen to sing, although Simon was tempted after Sophia insisted that my husband needed to chillax, and that, besides, she wanted to see his artistic side. "What do you think? Should I sing?" he asked me, his eyes torn between panic and excitement. "Do what you like," I replied, which certainly meant no. In the end, Simon decided not to sing, so at least I won that battle. On the downside, though, Ivan immediately grabbed the microphone and wouldn't let go of it for half an hour, singing Sonny and Cher, Tina Turner, and ABBA tracks all the time, including 2 renditions each of Mamma Mia and Take a Chance on Me. Sophia accompanied her husband for Take a Chance on Me, standing behind him on the podium in front of their enormous TV screen and jiggling her butt in an attempt to imitate the choreography from the video. "We're so crazy," she howled, panting as she took a seat after the track had finished and Ivan had gone to take a leak. "I'm just so nuts," she kept on repeating, fanning her sweaty face with a napkin. "We really are crazy," we agreed, taking long sips of our margaritas, our foreheads gleaming under our cheap wigs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rumena. That was such a wonderful reading. Now we come to the part where I find very fascinating, which is question and answers, the Q&A section. I find it very fascinating because it's one place where we get to meet the writers, and not just the writers, but the thoughts behind the writing. So if anyone have questions to ask, you can put your questions in the Q&A. You can just find it there. I think I'll start with the questions while everyone is thinking about it. And it's for the five of you. And so before the students start putting in their question, I think my question would just be this. For the past 1 week, we've been talking about poems and stories and novels. And I want to ask for you guys, where did that come from? Where does that impulse to write a poem, the impulse to write a story, the impulse to even translate something, where does it come from? And I can start with Mary and then go the order you guys read again.
Hello. I switched spots so you could meet my moose. Yeah, the impulse to write a story. Also, what if maybe all the writers the faculty could put their cameras on? Then I would love to see everybody else's faces. Hi,
That was great.
Yeah. So for me, it's always different. I was telling the students about when I went to Duino in Italy, and I was trying to like get the muses to give me my own Duino elegies. And I was like, come on. But of course, it didn't really happen like that. But what did happen was that when I had gotten home, my grandfather had died and he had left me his typewriter that he used to write me letters about birds on. And the first time I turned it on, I just like wrote this poem that then had everything about my grandfather and this like typewriter and this kind of inhabitation of the spirit, and also Duino, and all of this stuff came together, and it was this series of poems that came out of so many things all at once when the time was right. So I feel like for me, poetry really like percolates, and I don't know it's coming, and I don't know what it'll be like. I never thought I would write poems about the Little Mermaid or maybe even Sylvia Plath, and so it's always surprising to me where it comes from.
Vladimir.
Well, with me and writing, it usually starts with an image of some sort. It's something I see, and then I try to find a way to describe it, maybe a language in which to tell its story. My novel started as this image of a guy. Well, it was this man-shaped figure walking down a corridor without a face, features. There was nothing, and usually there's nothing there. So I like that space where everything is dark, and I just think and try to find ways to shine a light here or there. And I don't think that my stories end up as pieces that have illuminated that darkness. There are always spots that remain untold or unseen. And I think it's because I like this as a reader. So I think, yeah, it's just an image, and I cannot, I don't know where that impulse comes to write. It's probably something very deep, maybe something for a therapist to find, or for me to find if I'm more aware of what I'm doing, of everything that I do unconsciously. And with translation, it's the opposite. The book is there, it's already there, so everything is clear. I've read it, or sometimes I haven't read the book, but I start translating it, and it's light, and I've seen that light, and I've seen some of the darkness in the novel, and then I try to recreate them. It's I don't know how to explain it, but I think I mentioned this during one of the seminars. In Bulgarian, the word for translator is prevodač, which could also mean someone who takes something or someone from this place over to the other, from this side to the other side. and there's jokes about people translating. What are you translating? I'm taking the kettle from this side of the river to that side of the river over there. So yeah, it's completely different writing and translating, but the impulse is mysterious. I think it should be mysterious, should always be mysterious, or we need to believe that it's mysterious.
Tariro, and thanks for that. That's very interesting. Like the translation thing, like moving from one side to the other. It shows so much clarity. Thanks. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was listening to that and also thinking this thing of carrying someone from one place to another, and I was thinking about life and the afterlife, but again, you not go down a rabbit hole. When I write fiction, it's usually from a place of concept. So, what if ideas, like what if the world was like this, or what if a person who did this was like that? And then I get curious about, what sort of characters would inhabit a certain type of world. And I just kind of decide to follow them around in their heads and in their world. Poetry is very different for me because I think poetry tends to come from a place of emotion. So sometimes if I've just been sitting in a certain emotion for a long time, then maybe one line or two lines come to my mind, and then I have to sort of write the rest of the poem around it.
Really interesting. Rochelle?
Yeah, so I think, like they already said, different forms, bring out a different impulse. So for me, poems are more like a lightning bolt striking you, or like a sneeze. I'm not sure which one. Sometimes it's glorified and sometimes not, but it's not in my control. It's not, there's no incubation and no outline. Whereas a story has more incubation. In fact, I think of a story more like, a park bench at the end of the road, or a garden wherein you have four people have to come and sit, and it's an alchemy. When the fourth person comes and sits, you have your story to write. So there's an incubation basically. And when I write screenplays, I write whatever catches my fancy or whatever disturbs me. In fact, I think I'm the oyster, and there is this irritating grain of an idea that's in my eye, and I'm scrubbing it red to get it out. And the only way you get it out is you write on pages. So yeah.
It's interesting.
So difficult to really say what it is.
Mary says like a sneeze, which is also an interesting way to describe a poem. Rumena?
Yeah, I think we have similar processes, most of us. It's just, something like a spark sometimes that ignites something in us. And for me, because I like stories, I like reading stories more. And so I've always desired to imitate something that made me fascinated. So that was the reason I started writing fiction. Now I've moved also to nonfiction because I work because I'm interested in social issues. So I think also what will ignite my imagination is something where I see some kind of an injustice, I think, or something bizarre or something tragic or brutal, and then I'll normally write a story around it. And very frequently I feel frustrated, and because of that frustration, I think I write in a scathing voice very frequently. I just realized that I was reading, I was like, oh, it's probably because I'm angry. So today I read about a girl, a woman that I know wrote on social media that she witnessed how someone that, there was a film crew was doing not a film crew, some journalists were filming something about children who had diabetes. And then this angry mother who wanted to have a birthday party for her daughter in that same public space just totally kicked off all the journalists. And she was like, it's my daughter's birthday, and she only has a birthday once a year. And there was a father with a daughter who was 2 years old, and she had diabetes, and she kicked him away from a public space. So I'm thinking, God, what do you have to, like, what kind of a person do you have to be to do something like that? And I'm definitely going to write something about it. It's like, oh, so then, there are these little things, they're in the news, or, people talk about them. People always ask me, are your stories autobiographical? They're not. It's just that, I just imagine, and very frequently sometimes just from the position of someone who's horrible, or from the position of someone who's frustrated. So those are the two things for me.
I totally agree with you. Like, you guys have, it's very interesting to think about where the stories or the poems come from. I think I relate well with Mary, because I think, apart from everyone here, she's the only one who just writes poems. Tariro dabbles, Rochelle dabbles. Like, so it's really interesting to hear your thoughts about writing itself. And that I think it's a beautiful, the opening answers, it's a beautiful way to go into the next question, which is, what comes first? Someone asked, what comes first, the theme of the story or the story itself? Do you figure out the meaning, or if you want it to have a meaning along the way? And I want to add something to that, because there's something that also fascinates me. I like, when we're thinking about this program, and I was looking at the past faculties, and I had to go online to look for what to read, because I want to make sure I understand the people that come in and read your works and everything. And one of Mary's poems I read was Visionary Elegies, that says, a boy was covered in pigeons. That was the beginning of the poem. It's like such a brilliant line that in my head, I'm like, where do we go from here? What's the next thing? And so I want to add that to the question. Oh, so I want to add that to the question. So for fiction writers, what comes first, the theme or the story itself? Or do you figure out the meaning, or if you wanted to have the meaning along the way? And for people who write poetry, where do you go after the first line? After a first line that's so very powerful, what happens next? And also, where does that language come from? That language to observe and to witness? And anyone can go. I don't want to keep calling names.
Yeah, I'll go about the fiction thing. For me, there's always meaning. I know what I'm doing in the beginning, and I don't want to get lost and not figuring out the meaning later, because it can get sloppy, and I really don't like deleting text that I wrote. So I know what the point is. Sometimes little things change, but not the meaning. If there's a symbol, I know what it means once I start. So that's, my answer.
Okay, with the theme, I always try, with fiction, I always just try to allow the story to be itself, because whenever I try to force a certain theme, so if I have something that I wanted to say at the beginning and I try to force the story to remain as that thing, it always just fails. So I just, write whatever and allow the character to go where the character wants to go. And, if it's something I don't like at the end, then I'll edit it out. And then with poetry, in terms of going from the single line, one thing I like to do is to sit in it for a while. So before I go back and sort of write around it, I want to think about, where did this line come from? So where did this line come from? Why was it coming from that place? And just go further into that. And that's how I add around it.
Vladimir, say something.
With me, it's usually a theme. For example, I want to write about, let's say, death. So this is a novel I've been working on for 5 or 6 years. I hope it will be done next year, but you never know. So it started with this idea. I wanted to write about death and traveling through death, inhabiting death. What does that mean? But I also wanted to make it lighter than my previous novel, and also funny. And so I started thinking about places where this could be or sound funny. And one other thing I wanted to write about was Sofia, my hometown, which is a city I don't like very much. It's not an inspiring city. So it could easily be translated as into a place where death is, because it's a gray city, it's boring and stuff like that. And but then there has to be someone moving these things forward. So then I start looking for a character, and then I see some things, and maybe that's where where story comes, and from then on I get a clear picture in my mind as to what I want to write and where I want to take that writing, in which direction. And it's all very confusing, and I get lost. I forget things, then I discover them again. I rediscover them as new things, as new ideas. And I think they're great ideas. That then I remember that I've already thought about these ideas and I've already discarded them. So I start all over, and it's a long and confusing process. And I don't know how to change that, but I think that there's something in it. It usually makes for very slow writing, but I get to a place where I start writing from some point onwards, and it just flows. But sometimes it takes me years to get to that place. And during those years, it's mostly the themes that I'm working with, themes and ideas.
Amazing.
So for me, earlier when I would think about short stories or novels, I went by all those how-to books that said outline and know your end and then start your beginning. But I would never understand my end. So I'm somewhere in the middle between outlining, so deciding and discovering finally. So there is a little bit of it that I might decide that this is the story, this is where it might want to go, but then I would love to discover it. So over a period of time, I take bigger risks. Earlier, I wasn't a risk taker. I wanted everything outlined. I didn't want to go off tracks. I didn't want to get lost. Now I'm fine getting lost in the woods, and I'm fine going to hell, basically. So it's like, I know I'll be found eventually. It's okay because I've written some other stories and they were complete. So that gives me confidence that even if I get lost in the woods, I'll find my way out. And that faith is enough to just not want to outline too much and go and discover it rather than decide. So for stories and novels, this is how I look at it. And for poems, I think it's one exhalation for me. I can't do it in 2 parts or 3 parts. But once the draft is in place, I can in intervals edit it. But the first draft is in one exhalation. So I only have to think before writing the poem whether I want to keep it with me or not. I was mentioning this in one of the writers' workshops that if I keep the whole poem with me, it changes in tone and it becomes something else. If I write it immediately, it has raw emotions of another kind. If I keep it with me, it turns into something else, even sometimes philosophy and wisdom. So, because the more you keep things with you, something changes about it.
Thank you for that. I like the way Mary and Rumena are like waiting for each other. It's like, who do you want to go next?
I think Rumena should go.
Okay.
Isn't the next question about poetry? And I don't write any poetry, so I
Okay.
think the
That's
poet
why I think you should go.
Well, Mary, I think you should round it up for us, and then we'll go to the other questions. We have 2 other questions waiting for you guys.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just say for what you asked about that first line of the poem and it's starting off. Yeah, that's the poem, that series that I described, that like I sat down at this typewriter and it all just like came forward. And in the poem itself, there's a lot of different things going on. There is the cliffs of Duino in there. There's also heart surgery, because I was working in heart surgery at the time. So there's these like kind of images of the body, and those are emerging. And it's the initial image, which is a boy was covered in pigeons, is something I saw in Venice when I was, in Italy and near Duino at the time. And I don't know why, but something about sitting at my grandfather's typewriter, where he would always write me these poems about birds, and he only had one hand. He had lost the other hand in a ranching accident, and he would like type these out, these letters about birds to me on this typewriter. And it was our only real communication, because he was a very taciturn, kind of hardened rancher. And then, I guess when I started college, he started sending me these letters about birds. It was amazing. And then left me this typewriter when he died. So there was this moment of strange feeling like so connected to him, and also so connected in some way to his love of birds, which makes me think of Vladimir. Actually, now with this poem, I feel connected to Vladimir. But the next line in the poem is, he put bird seed in his hair and crotch so the ghost bird would descend and devour him. It's a very strange line, and I think about, where did that come from, right? Because the poem just began. It just began and it continued on and it was written, but things did happen in revision. So this is the first stanza. A boy was covered in pigeons. He put birdseed in his hair and crotch so the ghost bird would descend and devour him. I saw the brown bird with the yellow breast, smoking lucky strikes, thought she might be the Holy Spirit. There are no birds, only what this typewriter fleshes out. The cliffs are made from stone doves, and the boys had beautiful lips. And the poem goes on from there, but just like looking back and thinking about how did all those lines come, there's a line that I edited out that was something like, my ever-living grandfather is writing another poem about birds, and some other things like that, which were there as the wheels that kept the poem moving. But in revision, they weren't what the poem became. And it wanted a much more kind of streamlined, staying with the cliffs and the birds and the stone. And so I guess my answer for like, how do you move line to line? I move extremely intuitively and I move fast. And then I do a lot of work in revision. I would say might be the best way to answer that one.
Revision.
Rise.
Yeah. There are like a lot of about 3 questions in the Q&A section, but there's one someone sent to me directly by Emma, and because it moves from the question you guys have answered to this, and they said, I loved how much of this writing centered around family. I have a hard time writing about family history. I don't know how to authentically portray their perspectives / life experiences without sounding cliche. I think this is the problem for every writer. And she asks, how do you all deal with that?
I can go. I mean, you say things you're not supposed to say, I think. Like whenever you think, oh man, I can't say this, then that's probably what you should say. The cliche would be the stuff that everyone says. That's normally not true. There's stuff that people hide behind. So yeah, like brutal little details that are colorful and unique, and every family has that, but also that uniqueness. But also the power dynamics in families and the quirkiness of families are universal everywhere. So I would just say that truthfulness, but also be careful with that. There is a fine line where you try not to hurt someone with what you write, because the pain that you can cause by being autobiographical, let's say, will not, for me, it doesn't pay off. So I don't do it. I will change details and things like that, but I will remain truthful to the feelings, at least.
Okay. Anyone want to add something to that?
I'll add something to what Rumena said. I think when you think about being brutally honest and exposing people and that sort of thing, something that's really helped me is when I write, I pretend that I'll never publish something. So I'll just write it as it is. And if it's something that I feel could be controversial in the future, I just kind of keep it to myself. I don't, send it out for publishing the minute I write it, because that then gives me the time to go back and ask myself, did I say anything that was awful or something that shouldn't be seen by anyone besides myself? And to answer the original question, which is, how do you write about family without being cliche, is just going into specificity. So I think everyone has, say, a mother that loves them, but if you go into like very concrete examples of what that looks like in your own family, then that is, powerful writing. And I think if you look at Rochelle's writing, that for me was what made it so great, that she spoke about specific uncles, specific cousins. Yeah.
Thank you, Tariro. I think, yes, I think if writing, the main purpose of writing is to explore the human condition or to deepen empathy. If we start from those places, even if you're writing about family, your intention is never to hurt them or embarrass them or insult them. That's not the intention. It could be exploring or finding something that furthers your understanding of them. So I will draw a line if I have to ever write something that will hurt my family members and embarrass them and really hurt them, because that's not the purpose of my writing. But where it is to explore the dynamics, I would take those risks, that if one day they still read it, they wouldn't like really feel a betrayal of sorts. So I would draw that line. Having said that, I also feel there's a camouflage when you write in multiple genres, because if you want to write something very drastic, you always have short stories and those characters and who are your human shields, and you can say, I didn't do this, it didn't happen to me, it happened to them. So you always have shifting camouflages. So the poetry can be very confessional and truthful, but it can stop somewhere and you have other forms of blatancy, I should say.
Mary, Vladimir, any addition?
I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I have a new poem that I've been working on, and it's 13 pages long already, and I've never really written a poem that long before, and it's hyper specific, and it talks very specifically about things in my family, like my brother-in-law's quite gruesome suicide, and a lot of things that happened it's called Idaho, and a lot of things that have happened in Idaho, these tragedies of like family history and other things. And I feel very nervous about publishing it because, there's specific parts about specific people. So what I've done is send it to them and ask them how they feel about it. I don't know if that's like, and if they want me to make it less obvious that it's them, if they even allow me to tell that part of their story. Yeah, like my sister, I asked her, my friend Robin Schiff, there's a part about an attack that she suffered, and I asked her and she read it and, got her to approve that part. So that's how I've been kind of handling it, is just directly asking the people involved if they're still alive. Yeah.
I've never consciously tried to write anything about people I know, close people, family, friends, and I think I have. It's probably there is something stopping me from doing that. That's why I think I have problems with whenever I have to write about places that I've lived in. For example, it's very hard for me to write about Sofia. That's why that novel I mentioned earlier. I think one of the reasons it's not yielding is that it's about this place. But I think that it's also important to think or keep in mind that the period during which you're writing a piece is also very, very important. It's usually the emotions, the people are there, and they seep into your writing, and people later will find them. Will find the emotion that made you write the piece. Will see something in those people and ask you questions. What I mean is, there was this story, a very, very early story of mine that I wrote ages ago, and it's this strange dreamlike story about a child, and a child it's in a world like our own, but there are these beings that buy stuff from people, and that stuff from people is usually what makes people: memories, tears, emotions, anger, and the mother of that child is she's forced to sell herself inside. So she sells her tears, her sight, she sells her emotions, her memories, and everything. And this is told through from the point of view of the child. So I wrote that story, and it was a fun story for me to write, although it's very depressing. And then when it got published, my mother called me and asked, am I a terrible mother? And that's when I felt maybe this story is somehow connected to something that has happened in my life. She's not a terrible mother. We have a very close connection. But then a few months ago, someone else asked me about that story. And she said, this story is terrible. Is it about your family? And I said, no, it's not about my family. But then I started digging back into my memories and everything. And I realized that it was written in during a period which from the point of view of now, of me being here and now, is one of the worst periods for me and my family. And it's not a truly terrible period, but it's a period that made me think about what family is. And it was a period when, for some reason, I had to cut communication with a lot of friends. It was not because of them, but because of me. This was the first time someone came to my house to see if I'm doing, if I'm okay. That was before the internet, or not before the internet, but before cell phones and stuff. So that's what this bit of archaeology told me about that story, that sometimes things are about family and about people you know and love, even though the story on the surface is about aliens and people selling their tears and stuff like that. So maybe one way to learn how to write about family, or unlock that place where you can safely write about family and feel good about having to share this with other people. It could be friends and readers, not your family. Is to think about that the period and the place you've been when writing that story, or a novel or a poem.
Thank you, Vladimir. So really, yeah, writing about families can be very interesting, or writing stories that seem to be about writing families can be very, very interesting. There's a question from Elizabeth. It's a very long question, but it's a very important one, because I think we're seeing a shift in how art is being produced these days. And she says, I worry about the future of art, the rise of artificial intelligence. How are you dealing with the existential dread that the robots are going to take over us all, and that my grandchildren would think that ChatGPT poetry is the pinnacle of art? Those questions have a joke, but simultaneously serious, and your answers may interpret it in any fashion. So it's an open question. And then there's another question that says, what do you do when you're stuck on a piece that word doesn't sound quite right, or you spend 3 hours at your desk figuring out line breaks, but then you're like, wait, all of the words I've written sound #wrong. How do you get out of that stuckness? Yeah, I'll keep it's two questions in one, so I'll leave those two questions first. So, what do you do when you get stuck on a writing, and are you scared of ChatGPT taking over writing and poetry? Yeah, Roberta.
Yeah, I don't think we should be scared of things that come along. It's progress. Dread is just, paralyzing. I think maybe just try to think of the good things that can come out of it. I don't think art will die or humanity or anything like that. But I think it came out of us, so maybe we should just try to use it to our advantage. And it's very normal to get stuck on something, just like in any other process. Sometimes just leave it, come back to it. Just don't get into the loop of being frustrated through it. I mean, I've done it and it's hard. It happens a lot, but then, give yourself some time and be kind to yourself. That's all.
I'll jump in on the second one in reference to that 13-page poem I'm working on. I've been working on this thing for 3 years. And I change the line breaks every time I work on it. I'm not kidding. And so I feel like there's something, sometimes it's actually a really good sign when you feel the kind of, the word doesn't sound right. You're figuring out all of this. Often that stuckness for me is a sign that I'm doing something I'm a little afraid of, I'm unsure of, and I'm taking a risk. And I feel like that's really where things turn out in the end. If you can ride through it, right? If you can not bail. Like there have been times where I just wanted to throw the whole thing in the trash, but you got it. The sort of staying in that space of uncertainty is really productive for art. For ChatGPT, as a poet, I think we should always be using all things to make new kinds of sounds and poems. So I'm equally interested in working with, the aliens of the computer and Skynet to make Skynet poems.
Yeah, I think for ChatGPT, I'm waiting for a research AI and submission AI to come along. I would like that dirty work to be done by them, so I could concentrate on the creation. And I don't think ChatGPT or any AI can ever replace a writer, a poet, a thinker, because they will need such huge algorithms of inventiveness. It's just impossible, because even if we track our own selves in one day, the amount of thinking and inventiveness we have, even if there are some pockets of recursiveness, is so much that I don't think any AI will ever replace anybody. But it's going to do our submissions for us. It should, because that's a redundant, boring part of life, of writing. If it could do some editing, I mean, please come on board.
Well, you hear no complaints from this part. If it can do submissions for me, I would embrace it with both hands.
Yes, and sorry, just to jump into that thing that art will never die. I think the fear of ChatGPT, I think it's more of a financial one, because people think about publishing, will I sell books and all of that, but in terms of actually me using writing to make sense of life, that doesn't need a publishing industry. So I think it's interesting to see what it will do to the publishing industry and how it will disrupt that. But in terms of being a writer, being a poet, that will always be there. You'll always have your voice, and I don't think any machine can mimic that, or any machine can do what we can do, because machines aren't living in the world in the same way that we're living in it. And then Elizabeth's first question, I think she'd asked about sitting with a poem and not knowing where to put the line break and getting stuck. And I think I'm also with Mary in that there are times when
we're losing you. Oh no. Oh, she's gone totally.
And she was about to say something great, and I could feel it too. Come back.
It was about to be something powerful. I hope she comes back. Well, this is the problem with connecting on Zoom. It's great, but it has its downside. And I'm so happy that BTL is going to be in person next year, and we get to hear these wonderful conversations among ourselves.
Just remember that we were discussing ChatGPT when one of us disappeared. So this is probably here to tell us something about. But yeah, I don't worry about ChatGPT. But it's great that every time it doesn't know the answer, it starts hallucinating. That's the original term. And it hallucinates and it produces strange stuff. You should ask it about history, literature, and it will give you these amazing right answers. And sometimes it's, for example, I asked it about the history of Bulgarian literature, and it produced a history that's not that hasn't happened, like writers who are not existent, their themes, topics, bibliographies, and everything. So it's interesting to work with it and see what it does. It will probably make people think a lot about truth and reality, which is good and important. And I also remember being on the trolley bus a few months ago and overhearing two students. They were in high school, and one of them was like advertising ChatGPT to the other, and she said, "It's amazing. It will write your homework, and it will be original." So yeah, this is how people are starting to think about what ChatGPT could do. At least people in high school here in Bulgaria.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I'm all for AI poetry, a different kind of poetry. And we have one question here, and it's for the poets. And sadly, Tariro is out of here, but we have Rochelle and we have Mary. It says, when writing poetry, do you tend to focus more on the word sound when they are read, or how they appear on the page/document? And how does meaning interact with sound and formatting in a poem?
That's a big question, and I love it, because I actually have been thinking about that so much more in the past few years. I think before I was always writing for the page, and then I would reluctantly give readings. And so I wanted everything to be sort of scripted to play in the reader's head in a certain way from the page. But in the last few years, I've been performing with a band called the Mighty Vitamins here in Lincoln. And so I've been performing poetry, and when I perform the work, it's stuff that I've written on the page, but then in the performance, it's the band is all improv, where we're listening to each other the whole time. It's me and five musicians, and they're playing off each other, they're playing off me. And so the poem itself becomes this whole new thing in that. Lines will repeat, things will change, things will sound different. Like, it becomes where the thing on the page was just a kind of like placeholder or notes, and then the performance becomes something completely different. And I've never tried to then take the performance, if we've recorded it, and translate that back to the page. But I think that's the next thing I want to try. And because this is a question I'm deeply interested in, and in the middle of thinking through myself. So I don't have any like big answers for it. I just have my own sort of processes and trying to figure out how to make the things live on the page, live in performance, have new life on the page in the next stage.
Rochelle, do you want to jump on that?
Yes, see, when I used to read or practice Haibun, at least that form makes you think a lot about the rhythm more than even free verse, because that specifies on lyricisms. So you definitely are more attentive to lyricisms. But I think when I'm thinking about rhythm, I feel that when I read different poetry from different poets, each person has their own rhythm and their music, and I feel that we are all very musical, whether we sing or we compose music or not. You'll know that with poetry and poets on as silent on their page. they have a certain rhythm of those words that when you read them, even as readers silently, there is a rhythm. So I think when I teach, I try to like provoke that musical rhythm in by reminding students about the music they have in them. More than that, I don't know, because this is such a large question actually. But I noticed one more thing about breath and poetry. When there was a time when I performed one piece of poem over the years at different festivals, and by the time the same poem had sounded differently in the beginning, and by, like you say, many years down the line, something had grown, the same poem had grown inside me. Okay. That it had its own breath and cadence, and it had become its own organism. So I think breath also has something to do with how a poem is read out loud. So very big question, but I think provoke and invoke the musician in you to get that rhythm.
Nice. Let's see. We don't have any more questions here, but before we go, I have one last question for you. Earlier today, I was talking with a student, and we were going around about our favorite books and poetry and the things we read. And I find it very fascinating, because I think one way to know a writer is actually by knowing the books they read and the books they hold dear to. Like I'm always with anywhere I go, there's always a copy of Omeros by Derek Walcott beside me, because I'm such a fan of the epic that it's like my touchstone for everything I do. So I'm very curious to know the books that are like touchstones for you in your own arts practice, and if you can share with us why those books are important to you, that would also be great. And anyone can go. I don't want to like keep calling people. Okay, we can start with Mary, and then Vladimir and Rumena and Rochelle, because that's how you guys are arranged on my screen.
Well, I'll go back to Plath for my answer, because, I got her collected when I was like 14, and it was extremely important to me. I learned so much about the image and about the line from her. I was talking to my workshop about this. There's a poem in the back. There's a section of the collected that has her juvenilia, things she wrote when she was like a teenager and in college. And there's a poem in there that she wrote in the back of her math class. And I remember when I saw that, I felt like so no longer alone, because I was definitely the high school kid that was writing poems in the back of the math class. And it was called Mad Girl's Love Song. And I was like, I have felt the way that this person feels in this poem. And it was a villanelle, and I didn't know anything about villanelles. So I started learning about form. And yeah, I would say that book was, and it's still extremely important to me. And then another book that I've just been going back to again and again while I'm working on this long poem is James Schuyler's The Morning of the Poem. And it's this like phenomenal long poem, and it's teaching me a lot. So I would definitely, I'll put his name in the chat, because it's spelled a little different than you might pronounce it usually, or you might know to pronounce it. Really fantastic.
Great.
Oh, wait, I wanted to say one fiction one, just so you guys know that I do read some fiction. All right. I started reading Haruki Murakami in high school. Love him.
Vladimir.
So I have a favorite writer, and he's amazing, because he writes these strange mixtures of fiction, memoir, and non-fiction. And he's the only one that I've seen putting in one place between the covers of one book, The French Thinkers and Conan the Barbarian, and also his memoirs from growing up in New York. in Harlem and living in Manhattan. And his name is Samuel R. Delaney, and he writes a lot about writing and thinking about writing, what it means to be a writer, and what it means to work with language. And I think his influence is the strongest, although I don't think that in my writing I've ever tried to emulate his writing. It's just up there or in front of me or around me, and I just quickly step into that territory to get some inspiration or see how things are done or could be done or should be done. And then there are also these guys from about a century ago in Bulgarian literature. There were 4 of them, and they went to other countries and came back with these ideas about sexuality, psychology, psychoanalysis, and stuff like that. And then formed this short-lived modernist movement called Diabolism. It's not connected to devils and Satan and stuff like that, but it deals a lot with people discovering who they are. There are a lot of mirrors in their stories, doubles, forgotten memories, and strange occurrences. So they were also an influence. And also there's this writer that I later discovered was went also to or lived or used to live in Iowa City. I'm not sure. Her name is Margaret Young, and she wrote this huge novel, Miss Macintosh, My Darling, which is absolutely amazing. And every sentence in that novel, it's about 1,300 pages. Every sentence could be taken and then reworked, I think, into a separate novel. It's as if you're looking at the hologram of something, and every sentence is this piece where you could stare into. It's not a pixel. It's a painting, a universe on its own. And she's something I keep coming back to, and it's her writing is amazing. It's very slow, and you get lost in it. And there are sentences that start here and somewhere else, and this somewhere else it's not on that level of existence. She's amazing. I'll just write her name in the chat box.
Thank you, Rumena, and then lastly, Rochelle.
Yeah, one of my favorite writers is someone that Vladimir translated. That's George Saunders. He's also kind of he's social in that he will criticize things that are happening through a fantastic or dystopian perspective. He's just absurd in many times, but my favorite, some of my other favorite writers are, he wrote a book about Chekhov, for instance, that, I go back to Chekhov sometimes when I want to go back to a good short story and think of how the structure of it, how it should work. But generally, I would say I really like stories that are both funny and sad, and that have a sense of brutality in them. So Flannery O'Connor is my favorite writer, and I've also translated her. I like some other American short story writers like Lucia Berlin. I really like. She's not that funny though, and neither is Alice Munro, but I still adore her. She's Canadian. So yeah, there will be they change, but I think Flannery O'Connor. It's kind of I can always learn. I like the epiphanies in her short stories, and Carver I also love very much. Those are the kind of the classics that I always go with.
Yeah, so I don't have a touchstone, but I do have, flavors of the season, and I've had my Murakami phase and my Arundhati Roy phase. So I do have various seasons, but no one book that, I'm waiting for that time when I would have that one book by my bedside, which I would go to. But no, I think it's one of the reasons is I didn't study literature. So I came to literature much later. And when I became a writer much later, because I was planning to be an advertising professional. So when it was an accidental detour into literature, I had to then read up a lot to gain ground of what was going on. So I missed those quieter times when you fall in love with literature and you have autumn changing to summer or spring, and you have that time to fall in love. It was very fast readings, but now I do rely a lot on world poetry and world anthologies, because that allows you to get a flavor of every country. So now it's become that, but not, I'm waiting for that touchstone book.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Thank you all. It's been very wonderful hearing you read and hearing your thoughts about the things you do, and especially about literature and writing and books, which I think that's what brings us here from every corner of this world. And I'm looking forward to seeing most of you in person next year. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that experience. Yeah, so we've come to the end of our faculty reading. And before we go, I just want to remind us that BTL is a program under the International Writing Program. And this year, BTL Peace and the Writing Experience is generally funded by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs of the U.S. Department of State. Yeah, and so we'll be putting out a call for next year, probably early next year, and bringing people into Iowa City, which is the city of literature. But for me, it's like the cradle of my own, what writing is for me. And yeah, I look forward to seeing everyone in person. And so have a great day. And for the students and faculty and TAs, BTL continues, and we will see everyone 8 a.m. CST time tomorrow.